tell us what you are seeing. We are seeing arrivals at the moment. I believe it's possibly the family arriving at St. George's Cathedral.
Tulas, we're not seeing any cars arriving in front of the cathedral just yet. However, the numbers of the clergymen have certainly increased here on the steps of the cathedral. I also see some more police cars, or rather, oh yes, I can see SAPs on the other side, and I can also see the traffic officers. But yes, I think I can see some movement here, people probably waiting for the family to arrive, but they're certainly not in Wales Street as yet.
Yeah, it hasn't rolled by to your side. We've had the visuals live on TV, though, a few cars that are coming through, and we believe it is the family, or the Tutu family, that is actually making their arrivals at St. George's Cathedral. It is at the back of the cathedral, so it's not on your side where you are standing by, Aisha, but we certainly can see that movement of people starting to arrive from that side. And they'll be given, of course, that moment. They'll be the ones receiving, the family, the Tutu family, will be the one that will be receiving the body of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We are seeing visuals of Archbishop of Cape Town, Thabo Makgoba, who is there, and it's sort of at a distance, but through that fence, that palisade fencing, we actually can see him there with other members of the Tutu family also arriving there to be there in time for the arrival of the cortege. It will be a key moment for them as well, because they are sharing their grief with South Africans. This was a man who was a father, a grandfather to them, but to us as South Africans, he was simply our beloved Arch. And that shared grief, that shared humanity in our moment of grief and in our vulnerability, but also in coming to terms with a new era without Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Archbishop Thabo Makgoba will be central and key. He is a successor in title to Archbishop Desmond Tutu. You're watching eNCA. Those are live visuals coming to you from Cape Town. To the right of your screen, I think that's where your main focus really should be, because that is St. George's Cathedral. We are seeing members of the Tutu family and other people, dignitaries, starting to arrive ahead of the first day of the mortal remains of Archbishop Desmond Tutu lying in state, to allow members of the public to come through and file past his coffin, which will be there for them to actually say their final goodbyes. It is a solemn moment. It is a practice that many people undertake, and it actually symbolizes that closure that many people want when someone has passed on. So the extreme right is St. George's Cathedral. In the middle frame that you are seeing on your screen is Adderley Street. That's one of the turns that the cortege will make as it makes its way to St. George's Cathedral. And to the left, we are seeing Herzog Boulevard, one of the streets from which that cortege will have come through just before turning onto Adderley Street, and then proceeding past the Slave Lodge and all the way to Wales Street, and then parking in front of the cathedral. Recap for us, Aisha Ismail, what the Reverend that you spoke to a bit earlier on told us, what will happen once the cortege has parked in front of the cathedral on Wales Street.
So once the body arrives, the family will be standing here with members of the clergy to receive the body. It will then go into St. George's Cathedral, and the family will then have a private moment with to say their prayers, to meditate inside the cathedral. And at 9 o'clock, I'm told that the public will then be allowed to go inside. Now, Tulas, I must also just tell you that the Dean of the Cathedral, Michael Weeder, has also just come out of the cathedral. So I imagine we're going to see some movement anytime soon. We're expecting the family to come and line up also here on the steps of the cathedral. As I said, the hearse, the cortege, will arrive outside here in Wales Street, and then it will then go inside to the cathedral, where the clergy, along with some of the family members, will have their quiet moment before the public will be allowed to come in and pay their last respects to Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Yeah. And what a powerful platform Archbishop Desmond Tutu turned the pulpit into, right? And at times when the debate would be, should this priest, should this man of the cloth be doing that? And this is the reason why St. George's Cathedral became so central and a focal point in terms of remembering the life and legacy of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who lived by the creed that, quote, "The Bible is one of the most subversive things you can have when there is injustice and oppression and exploitation," end of quote. So, I mean, there was no doubt in his mind that the pulpit and the Bible, the Word of God, was meant to actually directly confront and push back against injustice, oppression and exploitation, no matter the cost. And the number of times that Archbishop Desmond Tutu would say openly that there's nothing that apartheid authorities could do to him because he didn't derive his mandate from them. His mandate, he would say and would insist, his mandate came from God, and therefore there was nothing they could do. I'm just thinking, Aisha Ismail, for instance, about the letter that Archbishop Desmond Tutu wrote to the then Prime Minister B.J. Foster in 1976. And a few days ago I was talking about this letter. I made the mistake of thinking that it was after the events of June 16, 1976. It turns out it actually was before the events, a few weeks before. And he says, in line with this mandate coming from God, he says he got a strong sense that this is what God wanted him to do, to write to Foster and tell him about the evils of apartheid and warn him of impending disaster unless the dignity of all and the rights of all are affirmed in South Africa, and how the black population, particularly in Soweto, was becoming restive and restless in as far as those injustices are concerned. It just takes me back. He says once he got the sense that this is what God wanted him to do, the letter pretty much wrote itself. He says as soon as he sat at the table, the letter pretty much wrote itself. It was an open letter. It was ignored by the Foster administration. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, you had June 16, 1976. And of course, the Arch says you could not then say, "I told you so," after the events of June 16, 1976, because the focus became about the lives that had been lost, the young people that had been killed by apartheid security forces. So in a roundabout and a long way, I'm making the point about the centrality of turning the pulpit into a powerful instrument against injustice.
Exactly, Tulas. And of course, we also know that Archbishop Tutu was unambiguous when it came to speaking out against every form of injustice. And he was very clear when he said you need to take a stand, because if you don't stand and speak out against oppression, you will then be regarded as an oppressor. And I think that a lot of people took their cue from the Archbishop, because it was, if the Archbishop can take a stand, so can we. Because a lot of people, and especially during the apartheid days, where the churches were segregated and they were led by the priests of that time, would look and say, but, our priest told us not to get involved in politics. But then you had somebody like Archbishop Desmond Tutu who said, but you have to get involved in politics. Politics is about our life. If you do not speak out against oppression, you then become part of the oppressors. And he was very clear about that.
Yeah. Aisha, stand by in a moment. I'll rope you in, but I just want to talk to the what. Yes, go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say, I'm seeing more clergy coming onto the steps, and as you can see, that it's now been increased. Earlier we saw about 3, then we saw about 6 of them, and the numbers have now again increased, and I think that very soon we're going to be seeing that cortege arriving. But yeah, I think it's still going to take just like a few minutes more to slowly come up Adley Street and then come into Wales Street, where it will then stop in front of the cathedral for, as I said, the family and the clergy to receive the body of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and then to take it into the cathedral, where they will have a quiet and private moment.
Absolutely, Aisha. Actually, you hit the nail right on the head, because that's exactly what I was about to talk to. The visuals to the right of our viewers' screens, that's coming. Those visuals are coming through from St. George's Cathedral. The increased movement of members of the clergy is a clear signal that any moment now we will see the cortege rolling onto one of those streets that you are seeing on your screen at the moment, being Adderley Street, as well as Herzog Boulevard being one of the other streets that are there. This really will bring us into sharp focus in as far as day one of Archbishop Desmond Tutu laying in state at St. George's Cathedral. Aisha Ismail, as we watch the streets of Cape Town, and with your history and rooting within the city of Cape Town, I just keep going back to, if these streets could talk, my goodness, what a story they would have to tell about Archbishop Desmond Tutu's role, and also just perhaps bringing into focus. Our viewers will be seeing that part of what we've done at eNCA is adopt the color purple as one of the colors that we use in as far as our on-screen elements are concerned. I can tell you now, you and I know that in broadcasting we don't easily give up our identity in terms of the colors that are identifying of our channel. We do that purposefully, to the extent that there's someone who's left behind by the conversation about why we kept saying yesterday, quote unquote, the purple shall govern, the purple shall govern. What are we talking about in relation to the streets of Cape Town that we are showing our viewers? Take us back to that story, Aisha.
Well, you're talking about that day when there was a protest outside here in Wales Street and then into Berg Street, and the police then came and used tear gas and also baton charged some of the activists who were here outside, and that was the day when the police brought that water cannon. But what we were not expecting was for the water to be purple, and the reason why they used purple was so that they could spray the activists outside, the protesters, with this purple water, and then they would be easily identified and be arrested and taken to court on that day. And it was that day also when Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Mama Leah came out to come and appeal to the police to stop what they were doing. And again, as you were saying to us, if the streets of Cape Town could talk, what a story the streets would tell. Because also, isn't it interesting that Nelson Mandela spent 30 years first in prison at Paulsmoor Prison, and then being moved to Robben Island, and then of course going to Victor Verster Prison, spending all that time here in the city of Cape Town. Archbishop Desmond Tutu then coming to be the Archbishop in Cape Town, and how blessed are we that his funeral service will be held in Cape Town, and that his ashes will be interred right here in St. George's Cathedral. So we will always have the Archbishop with us. But Tulas, I've just been alerted to the fact that the priest at the Milnerton Church that Archbishop Desmond Tutu also attended, remember his home was in Milnerton, and we can see Father Selwyn Engelbrecht also standing along there with the clergy, waiting to receive the body of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I'm thinking that I'm just wondering what's going through Father Selwyn Engelbrecht's mind as he waits for the cortege to arrive here outside St. George's Cathedral.
Yeah, absolutely. And Aisha, as you mentioned, the various prisons, where Nelson Mandela served time, you're just reminding me as well of another element, because there are so many of these layers of these stories, and I'm pretty sure that by the time we are done with all our broadcasts, done and dusted at the end of the funeral, we will not have told all the stories and the elements to the history and legacy of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The one that I want to talk to in relation to the prisons that you mentioned, the South African Council of Churches at the time that he led that organization, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, actually ran a program to actually facilitate visits to Robben Island by the families of people who were political prisoners at the time. May seem like a small thing, but actually if you think about how the isolation of Robben Island, it was meant to isolate people not only politically but also in terms of socially and in familial relationships as well, because I mean it's remote, it's not like any other prison where a person can just simply go there. It was also a matter of the allowances that were being made for letters occasionally being written, and people could go for a very long time. In fact, many prisoners served the entirety of their prison term without ever receiving a visit. And so an important element during the time of Archbishop Desmond Tutu's leadership of the South African Council of Churches was that program to facilitate visits to Robben Island. And I think that's one of the stories that we must absolutely bring to the fore, that ability to facilitate that and provide leadership, because part of what we talk about in his leadership, him stepping into what was a vacuum, a leadership, what would have been a vacuum, let me be correct, what would have been a vacuum with leaders who were in prison and other leaders of the liberation struggle out in exile. In stepped leaders, many leaders in various structures, including leaders of the clergy, such as Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
And of course, Tulas, we cannot forget and deny the role that religious leaders played in bringing an end to apartheid. And when I talk about religious leaders, I'm talking here about religious leaders from all the religions in South Africa and faiths in South Africa. We talk about the role that the Christian faith played, Muslims, Hindus, Jews. Last night we saw the Khoisan religious leaders represented there, the Baha'i faith, and that is how the whole interfaith service started. It started here at St. George's Cathedral, where the Archbishop called together all the leaders of the major faiths and said to them, we need to come together and we need to provide leadership and guidance, because people look up to religious leaders. No matter which faith you come from, you take your cue from your priest or the imam or the rabbi. And that is why the Archbishop thought that it was so important to bring together religious leaders from all faiths.
Yeah, without a doubt, Aisha. And just building on what you just said now, it seems to me that part of what Archbishop Desmond Tutu had was the ability to understand just the influence and authority that he had politically, socially, and morally, but also taking that with the acceptance that actually some of your actions and your interventions will not be as popular, but sometimes will actually be needed and critical. I'm going to pause. I'll finish that story a bit later on. I'm pausing because on Herzog Boulevard we are seeing what looks to be a procession of cars that is making its way towards you there, Aisha. Of course, you did say that the Archbishop's insistence was that things were to be kept simple, and from what I'm seeing the arrival there of the cortege turning from Herzog Boulevard, and they're about to make their way. You'll be seeing them in short pretty soon. I can tell you now, they've kept it very simple, in line with the wishes of Archbishop Desmond Tutu there. It's none of the usual hearses that we've seen at a number of other funerals. It really does look simple. It is escorted by vehicles from the city of Cape Town's law enforcement and traffic authorities, and they'll be making their way up towards you at the moment. I don't know how much of that you can see at the moment, Aisha.
Well, Tulas, from where I'm standing, I can now see the camera people and the photographers kind of aiming their cameras towards Adley Street, and so, as you say, you can see the cortege coming up. Is it in Adley Street now already, Tulas? Is it about to come into? Turn into Wales Street?
It's coming into view on Adley Street. It's certainly coming up towards. Yes, it's certainly coming up Adelaide Street at the moment, led by a motorbike and vehicles from the City of Cape Town traffic authorities, and there you see that Mercedes-Benz vehicle also being part of that procession. And so they'll be coming into view for you at the moment. Everything being kept as simple as possible, in line with the wishes of Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Okay, so Tulas, just to give you an update, I've also now just been alerted to the fact that the family will stay inside the cathedral and that the clergy will receive the body outside and then take it inside, where the family will then proceed to have their quiet moment inside St. George's Cathedral. So that would explain why there are so many clergymen outside waiting to, and we can now see the cars arriving into Wales Street.
Yeah. So it's coming up to the front of St. George's Cathedral there, where, as you say, Aisha, there will be the casket and the mortal remains of Archbishop Desmond Tutu will be received by members of the clergy. There's a moment, just a few moments ago, that really struck me as they drove past the arch, which really talks to the values as well as the rights in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. What an appropriate symbolism that was for me. Just a few moments ago we saw that, and they've now pulled up to the front, and we expect that the processes will start unfolding any moment now.
Tulas, there you can see Archbishop Mahoba going towards the vehicle carrying the casket of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and from what I can see is that it does appear to be a very simple pine casket as per his wishes, and they're now lighting the incense, and I'm just going to pause for a minute so that our viewers can just watch and absorb what is happening outside St. George's Cathedral. I can also see some family members of Archbishop Desmond Tutu outside, and I can see the Dean of the Cathedral, and there you can see the very simple, plain casket with a bunch of white carnations as per Archbishop Desmond Tutu's wishes.
Let us pray. This year long for the running group, so long for you, my soul, O God. My soul is thirsty for God, thirsty for the living God. When shall I come and see His face? My tears have been my food day and night, while they ask me all day long, where now is your God? As I pour out my soul by myself, I remember this, how I went to the house of the Mighty One, into the temple of God, with the shouts and songs of thanksgiving, multitude keep high festival. Why are you so full of heaviness, my soul? Why so unquiet within me? Or put your trust in God, for our faith is yet redeemed by Cathedral. Together, glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
And to us, as you can see, the body of the late Archbishop is now being carried into St. George's Cathedral, led by the clergy. We also saw some members of the Tutu family, the son the son Trevor, the daughter Tandeka. We also saw Mpo Tutu, and they're now going into St. George's Cathedral, where they will now have a private moment before the viewing will be open to the public.